Ready? Okay. Welcome, everybody. Simon Rosenberg from Hopium Chronicles. This is our weekly gathering of our paid subscribers. Thank you all for helping create the fuel that spreads the hopium far and wide. I want to talk about the election. I mean, it's October 9th tonight. We are less than 4 weeks away. It's hard to believe that it's really here. Lots and lots of people are voting. The early vote window extended very dramatically this week. Huge, very important states like Arizona and Ohio and Montana are turning on this week, and so we're going to start getting a lot of new information about the election in the early vote, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. And so, the election's here, and whatever money you're going to donate, whatever work you're going to do, as I've been saying, we need to have a good day every day. We need to do work to advance our cause every day. It's not just something we do on the weekends or something we'll do 3 days before the election. It's with all the tools we have now, you can do work and donate money every day, either through Hopium or through other means. And it's really critical that we have this, we got to win every day mindset that, it's because people are voting now, and every contact that you make could mean a vote, right? Every dollar that you give means that those ads are talking to people as they're about to go vote. I mean, there's a level of intensity now that is beyond anything since we, even from last week when we got together. And so, just the most important thing is we just have to keep working as hard as we can and leave it all on the playing field, as Coach Wallace told us a few months ago. My basic take on where things are right now is that the presidential race is close. The 7 states are close. They're all in play. We still have an advantage in the national popular vote. And I'll go into that a little bit in more detail in a bit. We are closer to 270 in the battleground states, I believe, and we can talk about that too. The Senate polling is still very encouraging. I don't think the Republicans have been able to make any of the battleground states in play. We'll talk about Wisconsin in a little while. Montana, we still believe is a toss-up, and lightning could strike in Nebraska or Florida or Texas. I mean, the Senate is just a dogfight, incredible dogfight. And the House, I think there's just a lot of good feeling about the House in the sense that, our candidates are dramatically outraising the other, the Republicans. We've recruited, many of you have met through Hopium, the top candidates who are likely to flip the House. They've been great candidates. They're executing. We've got strong arguments. There's a general optimism about the House. And so the election that we all wanted to have is still there as a possibility for us. But like all possibilities or opportunities, we have to go seize it. And I really believe it when I write this every day, that a lot of what will happen in the next few weeks is going to be dependent upon how much work we all do. And in part, because what's made this election so fundamentally different from any presidential election that any of us have been part of. Oh, and then yes, I guess I'm doing this in order. Okay. Is that what makes this election so different from any other election we've been part of is that usually in the presidential elections, there are 4 debates in the fall. There's 1 vice presidential debate, 3 presidential debates. That's been true, I think, since I've been in this business and since the late 1980s. And certainly going back, we've had presidential debates going all the way back to 1960, right? We are not going to have the normal October presidential debate, or sometimes 2 that we have, which is sort of the signal to everybody that the election is here. You got to make up your mind. You got to go vote. It's the system we have, in essence, the tradition we have of announcing to people that, like, hey, you got to go vote now. It's election time. You got to take this seriously. And we don't have that tool this time. And we don't, we had the vice presidential debate last week, but there isn't going to be a presidential debate again in October because the big blubbery baby man, Donald Trump, the coward that he is, got his ass kicked so bad in the last debate. And he's not willing to go out and debate Kamala Harris again. And so because of that, we're entering a highly unusual closing 4 weeks of a presidential election. And as I wrote today at Hopium, I think one of the things I've come to believe is that the Harris campaign now has to sort of invent intensity and connection with voters and get them motivated to go vote beyond what a campaign would normally have to do. This incredible campaign that has rebuilt an airplane while they're flying it and done all the remarkable things that they've done over the last few months, from going from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris so successfully. They've made no major mistakes. Every week has been a good week, right? Her favorabilities are up. She's closing the gap on the economy. We're still in a very strong position in the national popular vote, and I'll get to that in a bit. We should feel good about where we are, right? When she got into this race, we were down and it was going to be hard. We are now, I believe, favored. And I think we're favored for reasons that are similar to what I've been talking about, but now are a little bit different, which is that I think a lot of what's going to happen now is that who can really fill the void of the presidential debate being gone, who can be loud and create motivation and intensity and dominate social media and to get their voters to go vote and the persuadables to be persuaded. And just the reality is that it's more likely to be us. We have far more money than they do, meaning that throughout all the battlegrounds, voters are going to be seeing more paid advertising, digital and TV, than Republicans. Second is that we have a far superior ground operation. And so we're going to be talking to voters in the way that we need to be talking to voters in the end. And that's a huge advantage for us. Third is that we have an enthusiasm advantage. And we're starting to see that enthusiasm advantage in the early vote. The early vote is very promising. It's still really early. It's early in the early vote, but the early vote shows that we're bringing it, and our grassroots is actually executing, and we're driving the vote better than they are in the early vote, which is this incredible test of sort of organizational strength and commitment and intensity for a political party now, given these very long early vote windows. Our candidate is far better liked. Our candidate is far more likable, right? She's talking about issues that really matter to voters. He's talking about eating cats and dogs and sharks and batteries and, trying to disrupt the ability of the United States government to sort of save people's lives in some of the most dangerous storms in modern history. He still remains, to me, this thing that I've been saying all along, which is that he's the ugliest political thing that we've all ever seen. He's a rapist, a fraudster, a traitor, and a felon. And I think that when we push all this stuff forward, right, it is just much more likely that the next 28 days turn out right, or 27, 26, whatever it is, turn out right for us, and that we move our voters to go do what they need to go do than they do. And the early evidence of that, right, Simon, that sounds really cool, right? But, you're just spitballing here, is what we're seeing in the early vote. I mean, in the early vote right now, we are running ahead of 2020 nationally and in the battlegrounds. And, we won the election in 2020. So if we're doing better than an election we won, and where you're starting to see real Republican struggle is in the battleground states themselves, their early vote turnout is anemic. And as you read my piece a couple of days ago, there's been dozens of articles, literally, of Republican operatives in the battleground states nationally bemoaning the decision to outsource their voter contact and field operations to these fly-by-night, grifters that were not reliable. I mean, they basically took away a core party campaign function and privatized it outside the campaign. And no one's ever done that before. And it was stupid. And they may have made a really huge mistake. The second thing is that Trump has been continually raising doubts about the integrity of the voting process itself, and using mail ballots and all this other stuff. And so there's just a lot of weirdness on the right about voting and the early vote. And what happened in 2022 is we ran it up in the early vote and we won the election. They couldn't catch up to us on election day. And this is the second big point I want to make, which is that there is a lot of commentary in 2022 during my battle against the red wave. There was a lot of commentary about, well, this is like 2010 and 2014. And, I wrote a piece in October of 2021 saying why this election was not going to be like 2010 or 2014, right? And no election is ever like any other election. This election is not going to be like 2016 and 2020. It's going to be like 2022, frankly. It's going to be like 2024. All elections are unique. They're all sui generis. They all have their unique characteristics. And good analysts go into the guts of what's happening in this election as opposed to lazily referring to other elections that have no bearing whatsoever on this one. But there really are sort of two schools of thought about what's about to happen. One is that the 2016, 2020, where Trump has superpowers and this deep connection with working class Americans who are going to come out in droves, and that the polls are undercounting his strength. And part of my argument about that is that Trump never had that deep connection with working class Americans. He only got 46 and 47% of the vote in his two elections. Mitt Romney did better than that in 2012. And that even though he stumbled across the finish line with Russia and James Comey's help in 2016, this notion that he had these kind of superpowers was always exaggerated. It certainly wasn't the case in 2016. The election was changed at the end. The polls weren't wrong. And in 2020, we were in the middle of COVID. My God, like who knew what was going to happen in that election? And what's been happening since, so in my view, it is more likely that this election behaves more like 2022 than 2016 and 2020, because I think that after Dobbs, there's been one consistent dynamic in our politics that's emerged in state after state, in every kind of election, special elections, congressional elections, Senate elections, all kinds of elections, which is that we overperform polling and expectations, and they underperform it. And my theory about why that is that I think that something broke inside the Republican Party with Dobbs, that for a lot of Haley voters or moderate Republicans and Republican-leaning independents, that Dobbs was just a bridge too far. The combination of January 6th and Dobbs, it was like the extremism was too much, and particularly for women, right? For women, female Republicans, that the party became loosened from the party. And sometimes that meant they didn't vote. Sometimes it meant they voted for Democrats, right? We had a lot of crossover votes from Republicans in 2022, and we've continued to get those votes. And obviously what Liz Cheney is doing and Adam Kinzinger is creating an enormous permission structure for loose Republicans who are not MAGAs, who don't want to follow a MAGA party, right? That to come to us. Liz Cheney says something very important about this when she speaks, which is it's not good enough not to vote for Trump. You have to vote for Kamala Harris. We've never had this kind of permission structure and pressure on loose Republicans and weak Republicans to vote Democrat with us. And today there was a poll that the Bulwark did showing that there are large numbers of Haley voters who are giving very serious thought to supporting Kamala Harris. And so I think that it's my view that this election, the dynamics, if you're going to point to a previous election, you should point to the elections post-Dobbs, not to the elections pre-Dobbs, because I think our politics fundamentally changed, because Donald Trump stripped the rights and freedoms away of more than half the population in the United States. And women today in this country have fewer rights and freedoms than women in Mexico and Brazil do. And it's kind of a big fucking deal. And it's part of what's driving this election, right? Is that this outrage and this extreme public policy, and that women have become essentially second-class citizens in the United States. It's unacceptable. And it's fundamentally changed our politics. I believe that. So I still believe that the likely scenario of what's going to happen in the next month is this continued heightened overperformance of Democrats and continued Republican struggle, which is what we saw in the Republican primaries with Trump. He underperformed 19 out of the 20 polls. It's what we saw with the fascists in Europe. It's what we saw with Le Pen's party in France. We saw the Tories get their ass kicked in the UK, because the voters of the West are aware of the stakes of what's happening here. They're aware of what's going to happen. And they may be answering polls that they are going to vote for Trump, but when they actually have to go make the decision, you're seeing people show hesitancy, as they did in Europe, as they did in France, as they did in the Republican primaries this year with the Haley voters, right? Where Trump repeatedly underperformed his public polls, not overperformed them. Third, polling. Now, let's get to it. We've actually had a really good week of polling. And in fact, the polling has been remarkably stable and consistent since the debate, which is that Kamala Harris has a 3, 4, 5-point national lead, and we're in better shape in the battlegrounds. That's where the race has been. Yeah, there's going to be a couple polls here and there that don't show that election, but there's been like 50 polls that have shown that election, right? And there's been a couple little polls over here today, Quinnipiac, that were really crappy polls that didn't show that. Now, is that a harbinger of a new reality in the election? I'm deeply skeptical that it is. And the reason why is that two of the weekly tracking polls that I follow that matter to me, because they poll every week, And so, and they've been polling every week for a long time. And so they have a lot of data and they can see things changing, right? As opposed to pollsters that poll every 6 weeks or once a month and go into a state they haven't polled in 2 years or whatever. The Economist YouGov poll and the Morning Consult poll, the Morning Consult poll had Kamala Harris up 6 this week, her biggest lead in that poll, gaining a point from last week. And the Economist YouGov poll, which is really a well-constructed poll, had her gaining a point, another poll gaining a point, and her being up 4. This is very consistent with the polling averages, with all the other, the New York Times poll, right, which has been a very Republican heavy poll this cycle, and where she's never been ahead in that poll. She was up 4 points this week in the New York Times poll, that poll that's given us so much heartburn over the last couple of years. Hold on a second. She was up 4 and she gained 4 points from their last poll. So you have national, credible, serious national polls, right? The New York Times poll is the #1 rated poll in 538, showing her up by 4 points, 3 points, 5 points. If you look at my chart I did yesterday in my post, I showed you how many of the polls had the race: 49-46, 49-45, right? All the same numbers. And then in the states, right, we are marginally ahead in Pennsylvania. We had a poll this week, a credible, serious poll by a Republican pollster that had us up 4 points in Pennsylvania. We had a credible, serious poll by a Republican pollster in Michigan showing us up 3 points. I went back and looked at Wisconsin. We've been up 2, 3, 4 in Wisconsin in the last few weeks. I spoke to Ruben Gallego yesterday for a long time in Arizona. And, he thinks where the race is, that she's probably up by a little bit. He's up by 6 or 7, and he thinks that both of them are going to win. I talked to folks in Las Vegas who said the voter IDs that they're doing on the ground there are coming in better than 2020 and 2022, meaning that they think today, based on the voter IDs, where they're going to the door and calling people and how are you going to vote, those voter IDs are coming in better than 2020 and 2022 when we won those states, right? North Carolina, I still don't know how Donald Trump wins in a state when Josh Stein wins the election by 15 to 20 points with Mark Robinson. Mark Robinson is the head of the Republican Party in North Carolina. The guy is a despicable pig of incredible magnitude, right? How does the Republican brand overcome that? I don't know how they do it. I don't know how you overcome in what is a dead even race in North Carolina. The guy who is the face, the lieutenant governor of the state, the face of the Republican Party, is going to get beat by 15 to 20 points. We've never seen anything like this. Anyone who's been in the business who looks at that and says they think that, that Trump can prevail in that, they're just bullshitting through that, right? No one's been able to overcome something like that. And then when you look at these states, the way to think about this is we're competing in all 7. Polling, we don't really know where these races are. We could be up a point, 2, 3, we could be down 1. But the race now, what we have to do is that we're winning this election, but now we have to go win it. I mean, this is what I was getting at before, is that because of this anomaly of the presidential, not having a debate, Kamala Harris is more dependent upon our work than she would be if she had a debate to be able to galvanize and talk to people. The work we're doing to reach voters through the money and the volunteering we're doing, it actually now I understand, and I didn't really understand this till a few days ago, it actually matters more than I even understood a week ago, because we have to carry the burden of being able to talk to voters and fill in the gap of that usually is carried by the presidential election, which is why I think we're going to win. Because Donald Trump has no field operation. We're going to have many more ads up in the air. He's a disgusting, ugly pig, right? And MAGA's a losing politics. And if we go do the work, I think we're going to win. And so don't get spooked by polls, right? I mean, we do more, worry less here. Shame on anybody who kind of sent those polls around freaking out today without sending all the polls that were actually really good for us today. Be balanced, right? Don't fall into the trap that one poll sort of can wash away 50 other polls. The polling has been remarkably consistent and very stable for weeks now. Could it change? Of course, elections change all the time. But today, I would much rather be us than them. And I feel really good about where we are. And I think some of the other sort of underlying structural things is we had a really good youth poll from Harvard IOP where we were up 31 points. We were outperforming Biden 2020. We had a really good poll from Howard University showing us in the battlegrounds doing as well with African-American Black voters as we did in 2020. Kamala has made enormous gains on the economy. And in some polls now, we're actually ahead. I think all this time spending that Trump is spending talking about sharks and batteries and eating dogs and cats and trying to interfere with the ability of the United States government to execute, to save people's lives, is taking him away from the economic conversation, giving us space to improve our ground. Our candidate is far more liked and likable than theirs are, which is going to matter in the home stretch here. So, when I look at all this, I feel really good. And going back to this core fundamental fourth point, intensity measures. In 2022, part of what happened was that Tom Bonnier and I, who was supposed to be here tonight, and he'll come back, we developed this understanding of the election where we looked at something more than just polling, because the polling was close, like it is now, right? It's just close. Polling's not that precise. It's a sketch. It's not a photograph, the way to think about it. It's rough. There's, the level of precision of polling is being wildly oversold by people on television and in the media. It's very rough, sketchy, right? And so what we did was we started looking at these other measures that were available to us, other data, things like our performance in the special elections, which has been continued to be remarkable. It was remarkable in 2022. It's continued to be remarkable. Off-year special elections, all kinds of elections, ballot initiatives. And that's another thing, right? We may have a little bit of point or two with the ballot initiatives and the key battlegrounds, the abortion ballot initiatives. Second is we looked at fundraising. We had massive fundraising advantages in 2022, as we do now, another sign of intensity. Third is that voter registration, when Dobbs happened, shifted in our direction. That also happened when Kamala Harris became the candidate. And then fourth, the thing that really allowed us to understand where the election was the early vote. Now, historically, the early vote is not seen as something that you can really rely on to tell you about an election, in part because the early vote was very small. We didn't have these long early vote windows. Not that many people voted. It was often no excuse absentee. So it was kind of an exotic part of our political system. And most people voted on election day. That's not true anymore. We're probably at least 50, maybe 55% of the electorate's going to vote before election day. And so, people voting can tell you a lot about how people are voting, right? It doesn't mean that it dictates your understanding. And what Tom Bonnier's done through Target Early has given us a window into early voting to be able to look at how every state is voting, matching. These are things that are matched off the voter file. I can go into all the nerdy details if you want. And then it looks at where the early vote was in that state 2 years ago, and then 4 years ago. And so it's an apples to apples comparison about where the vote was in previous elections. Today, in the early vote, and it's early, we are running ahead of our 2020 numbers by about 7 points nationally. And in the battlegrounds so far, and there hasn't been that many votes, it's by more. Now, that's good, right? That means that we're showing intensity and our system is producing the voters that we need. And what's important about what's about to happen, and those of you who followed me in 2022 know that I was, my Twitter feed went insane during the early vote because I was saying, hey, guys, this kind of looks pretty good. We should be open to the idea that Democrats may do better in this election than people expect. I'm saying the same thing now, right? This early vote that we're seeing early on is better than we expected it to be. I'm just going to say that, right? Going way out on a limb. And that it is, and that what's important is that what happened in 2022, and I'm not saying it's going to happen in this election, is the early vote went up and it just stayed there. And it didn't change very much, change a point one day, but it was remarkably stable. Tom and I would talk every morning. This is something we were going to talk about tonight. And I would call him when the numbers would come in and say, are you looking at all this? Like it's remarkably consistent. Like at what point are we going to start falling down and the Republicans are going to gain? And it never happened. And so what's happening now is we're going up in Michigan. We're going up in Pennsylvania, right? We're doing better than 2020 in some of these states. And, what happened 2 years ago is it just stayed there. And then in the last week, it actually went up even higher and our margins increased by even more. And the thing is, if that happens, if our superior field operation, our heightened intensity, people who are bringing it, the 80 million postcards that are hitting all these households, right? If we just stay where we are, we're going to win the election. And, what's important is that NBC News did a poll of their last poll, which had us up by 4 points because all these media polls have been in the same place, 3 points, 4 points, 5 points, right? The NBC poll asked people if they were going to vote early or vote on election day. And 51% of people said they were going to vote early. And we were winning those voters by 26 points. Today in the early vote nationally, we're ahead by 24 points, basically the same number. So consistent with the polling. And what the poll analyst, Bill McInturff, who's a Republican, said is right now, if the Democrats can maintain that number, mid-20s, they're going to have so many votes on election day banked that the Republicans won't be able to catch them. So our goal now is to keep our strong early vote performance going through election day. And that happens only through the work of all of us, right? We have a major role to play in this election. What I'm trying to lay out to you is that things are going the way we want them to go right now. We should feel good about where we are. But we are winning the election, but we have not won it yet. And winning it will come down to us driving this early vote and winning the election in October, not in November, running up the score, as Bill McInturff said, and as we did in 2022, and winning and running up the score and getting so far ahead that they can't catch up on election day. That's what we need to do now. And that's what your money, your phone calling, your postcarding, your texting, your canvassing, your info warring, as I call it, all the things that we do is now it matters because people are voting. And because of this thing I said, where Kamala needs more of our help because she doesn't have the motivator and the intensity builder of a presidential debate. So my report to you, fellow optimists, is that where we are, where we want to be. Would I rather be ahead and be ahead by 10, 20 points? Yeah, but that's not going to happen, right? We are in better shape than they are. We should be able to close stronger. But it means that my pitch to all of you is that whatever you thought you were going to do between now and election day, however time you were going to give, how much money you were going to donate, you need to do more. And you need to try to give every day a half an hour, whatever it is, however you do it, to jump into a phone bank for Harris and Walz and one day, and then jump into a congressional phone bank, even for an hour, right? You finish dinner, you go sit for an hour, you make an hour of calls, you go hang out with your kids and whatever you're going to do, right? Afterwards, I'm here tonight with you, right? I'm doing our Thursday night gatherings, which has been wild and fun, by the way. You should all come tomorrow night. They've been great. And so I feel really good about where we are. And then to conclude is I just want to say that Kamala Harris's performance as a candidate and what she has accomplished in the last few months has been extraordinary. She came in under incredible duress, and took over a campaign that was not built for her. She unified the party right away. She made a great VP pick. We had extraordinary convention. She took over the lead. She's getting now, the New York Times has her up 4 points this week, and she's ahead in the polls, and she's doing really well in the battlegrounds. And we've got she's raised more money than any candidate in the history of the universe, right? As I conclude here, is I've known the vice president for over 20 years. I met her in San Francisco in days when I was much more involved in California politics. And I just want to say I'm just unbelievably proud of her. And she is bringing it every day. And we got to match the intensity she's bringing. We got to bring it every day for her because she's bringing it every day for us. And so the work we do now, I think this thing is within our power to go win. Hopium folks, let's go win this thing together. Thanks everybody so much. That's my presentation. Happy to there are a few questions. I'm not going to take raised hands. I just want to say that again. And I also don't take anonymous questions either. Let me just go in and see. Mark, I'm going to try this weekend when I have time. I'm going to try to produce one Hopium t-shirt, just one simple shirt, one color, different sizes. I think it's just going to say Hopium Chronicles, do more, worry less. I think if you guys want to, in the chat, in the paid subscriber chat, if you have other ideas, because I want one too, and I'm going to date it 2024, and I'm going to try to get that done. It's been on my list of things to do for like 3 months, and I just, I've been a little bit busy, and oh, Ellen, let me raise this thing about the ours having more voter registrations. That's bullshit. And of course, because anything that they're spinning, the likelihood of it being true is not high, right? So the way to think about this is that the way the Republicans are producing that data is they're showing you, 100 Republicans registered and 80 Democrats registered. So more Republicans registered than Democrats. And so therefore they're in stronger shape. They've been using Pennsylvania, right, as the main place they've been doing this. But then what they leave out is all these people who voted as independent, many of whom are young people who are going to vote 2-1 Democrat. And so we have this thing now where part of our coalition are independents who are functionally Democrats, because people in many states, when you register, you often don't have to pick a party, right? And we didn't have a primary. And if we had had a primary, presidential primary, a lot of those young people would have registered as Democrats to have voted in the primary. But there was no reason, there wasn't a presidential primary. So many of them didn't, they're just independents. My kids, when they first registered, they all registered as independent, my 3 Gen Z kids, except for my daughter, who's registered as a Democrat. And then they changed once they understood how the whole primary thing worked, right? And so that's a red mirage. That's not a real thing. And if they were doing so well in Pennsylvania, why are we kicking their ass in the early vote, right? In Pennsylvania right now, in the mail vote that's coming in. And so it's very important to realize that so much of what is about to happen in the information space is them saying that they're strong and winning and that we're weak and we're losing. And that is like 90% of what Donald Trump says. And then he says, eating cats and dogs and immigrants are going to come terrorize you, all you white people, all those dark immigrants are going to come terrorize all you white people. And that's it. Like, that's the whole campaign. I'm winning the election and I'm strong, and she's losing the election and she's weak. And so if you watch Trump's interviews, right, he does these interviews, literally the first thing he says every single time is, I'm ahead in the polls and I'm winning. And the reason why is that it is his entire argument. And if you've heard me say this, it's like Donald Trump's theory of the case here, and it's a legitimate one, right? Because he's crafty and savvy, but he's not smart and strategic, is that his basic message to everybody is, look, I may be a rapist and a fraudster and a traitor and a felon, but I'm leading in the polls and I'm strong and she's weak. I may be an extremist and a racist and a bigot and a xenophobe, but I'm leading in the polls and I'm strong and she's weak. I may be, I may want to end the Western alliance that's kept us safe. I may want to end the global economy that's kept us prosperous. I may want to end American democracy for all time, but I'm leading in the polls and I'm strong and she's weak. And so you have to understand that for us, what becomes really critical is we need to take away that he's leading in the polls. He also wants to be seen as leading in the polls because he needs a plausible narrative to contest the election. And so this issue about people ask me, like, Simon, why do you spend so much time talking about polls? It's because it's the central argument of the entire Republican campaign. It's the essential argument he's making. And so it's like more important to him than reproductive freedom, or, like when we look at a campaign, we think of issues, right? We think of, abortion, reproductive freedom, the economy. He thinks of strong leader, weak leader. That's how he sees the whole world. He's a strong man. And so, we need to make him a baby man and not a strong man. And they did that. The Harris campaign did a very good job of that at the convention. I think we've wandered from that a little bit. And I think it's very critical for us to understand that the reason they've launched all these fake polls is they push the polling averages of real clear politics, not 538 yet, but 538 will tip, in my view, soon, because they did 27 fake polls, 27 red wave polls, as I called it, just last week. And they tipped Real Clear Politics, and Real Clear Politics now says that Trump's at 281 in the Electoral College and he's winning. And that's important to Donald Trump, right? Because he has to be leading in the polls because he's strong and we're losing in the polls and we're weak in his simple mind, right? And also he needs a plausible map to say that we cheated. And Real Clear Politics gave him that map this last week, which is why we have to contest this polling space as aggressively as I do, because we can't go into election day. We need to do everything we can to go into election day with with the early vote having been huge, with there being reasonable understanding through Target Early and other things that it's been very democratic, that it's similar to what happened in 2022 where he ran up the score and they couldn't catch us, and that there isn't a plausible polling map showing him winning. We need him to go into election day with a clear understanding that he's losing and that he's a loser and that he's weak and he's desperate and he's pathetic and he's a rapist and a fraudster and a traitor and a felon and all the things that he is, right? We need this in order to make it less likely that he's successful at somehow cheating his way into the White House, right? So this game about who's ahead is really important. And it's why I spend so much time, in this. I will tell you that, I don't spend nearly as much time as I could. I'm not going through every poll every day. I'm not doing crazy stuff. I'm trying to bring you the essence of what I'm seeing every day, because I also don't want you to go crazy either, right? Because this stuff, it's like, you can get lost in all the data. And so that's the question. Let me go into the questions. There's a lot of good questions here. Let me try to see if there's a couple of common themes. Jessica asked, yeah, I didn't raise this. I should have. I know that there has been in the last few days, there's been discussion about the Wisconsin Senate race. And I posted in the email I sent to you tonight the last 5 public polls in Wisconsin, where Baldwin's up 7, 5, 4. One of them's, the Quinnipiac poll today, which had caused the big freak out about Harris, she's up 4 in that poll. I mean, there's no public polling showing the election close. So I don't really know what's going on there. I'm just going to say this. I mean, I know that we now have been told that they have polls showing the race much closer, but the Marquette poll came out last week and she was up 7 in that poll. The Quinnipiac poll came out today. She was up 4 in that poll. And I don't really know. I haven't looked as much in Michigan as I have Wisconsin. And I think we all have to realize that some of this is that, I think what happened in Wisconsin is that the Republicans dropped $20 million into the race, and she's trying to raise as much money as she can. And I think Alyssa Slotkin's doing the same thing. I mean, people are getting nervous. It's the end game. The negative ads hurt. I mean, there's a lot of negative stuff coming at everybody. And so, whether this was a fundraising ploy or whether this is a reality, I don't think we're ever going to know. Right. But again, there has been no structural shift in the election. There isn't some huge decline that we're going to see. I mean, again, the national polls this week that track week to week showed Harris gaining ground. The overwhelming majority of polls in the last few weeks have her up between 3 and 7 points nationally. There hasn't, as I read you polls in the states, right? The most recent poll in Pennsylvania by an independent pollster, not by one of these red wave polls, we're up 4. We're up 3 in Michigan. We're up in Wisconsin. So I think what everyone just has to realize now is the election is just really close, and you can't sweat the polls too much because they're all in margin of error. She's down 1, she's up 1, she's up 3, whatever. It's just really close. And we just have to go work our asses off and go win this thing. I mean, that's in some ways, my entire presentation tonight is really simple, which is we are winning the election, but we haven't won it yet. And we have to go work really hard to make sure we win it. That's it. That's the whole story. I mean, we can sit here and I can go play with the numbers and, of women and men in the early vote and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the data is the data. There isn't, in 2022, there was plausible sets of data showing the Republicans doing really well. And there was most of the data was saying it was going to be a close competitive election. There is no plausible set of data right now showing Trump winning the election. I just want to be clear about this, right? We may not be winning the election either, but he has not been up in a single national public poll in a long time, right? I mean, everything's been tied or ahead, and the only polls that he's been leading in the battleground states, for the most part, Arizona has been all over the place, right? But we've been consistently ahead in Nevada. We've been consistently ahead in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. North Carolina is, I think, a dead toss-up right now. I put an article on Hopium today that, and this has been confirmed by other political analysts there, that it is likely that far more Republicans have their vote disrupted than Democrats because of the storm. And you add that with Mark Robinson, and the Republicans are now all of a sudden facing, I think, an uphill climb in North Carolina, in my view. And it's one of the reasons I've pushed so much money there, is that you all, and I did an interview with Josh Stein today for Closing Strong, the series I'm doing with Tara that will be out tomorrow or Friday. Josh is going to win that. He's doing great. I mean, and people feel good there. I mean, they're struggling with the aftermath of the worst natural disaster North Carolina's ever had, and our hearts go out to all the people affected. But the Republicans have had two really significantly negative developments in North Carolina, right? Mark Robinson's implosion and Helene, which is going to make it much more likely that some of their voters don't end up voting than our voters. And it's just a reality, right? Because Western North Carolina is very Republican. It's a very Republican part of the state. And so, again, I feel good, and we could sit here and quabble. And my advice to all of you is, you can't get blown around by stuff. The Republican noise machine, the right-wing noise machine, is going to be pumping out all sorts of, and I do want to say this. They've been lying about the last election for 4 years. They lied about the red wave, and they're going to lie about this election every single day between now and election day. And they're already doing this thing where their internals are showing things better than the public polling. Then fucking release them. If they're so good, release them. If they're not releasing them, they're lying, right? Like, it's just like the idea that we're dealing with honest actors, Elon Musk and Donald Trump, right? Like, that we should believe that they've got some secret polls that show things better, then release them, guys, right? Show us. But when they stay secret, it means they're lying. And everyone can't fall for this stuff, right? They lie about the weather. They lie about everything, right? They lie about, and they lie about us every day, because they have to invent a party to run against, because they can't beat the one that they're actually running against. And so they had to invent things that happened in Springfield that didn't happen. They had to invent things that FEMA was doing that didn't happen. Donald Trump is inventing an opponent to run against because he can't beat the one that he actually is running against. And so do not fall prey, right, to this malicious, malevolent rapist, fraudster, traitor, felon, right? I mean, the story about how Donald Trump, I don't know that we're going to be able to make hay out of this, but we'll see, gave COVID tests to Putin before he made them available to the American people. Kind of unbelievable story, right? I mean, I think, though, that most people believe he's completely capable of something like that, right? I don't know that that's going to be something that moves people. Let me go to, and by the way, again, thank you all who have voted. Thank you all who are intending to vote early and have a vote plan. Thank you all who are doing the work to help us win the election. Thank you all who are coming to our events on Thursday nights, which are really fun, and you should come. And I got an email tonight from Robin. We're at 89,000 postcards written just on our little Thursday night things, just into targeted races. That's 4 or 5, 6,000 postcards in each of these districts. Many of these districts are going to be decided by 500 or 1,000 votes, right? So good job, everybody. Yeah, 89,000 postcards that Hopium's generated. And the Thursday night events are fun too, in addition to everything else. We have a good time. Let me get to questions. Let me just see a few more. God, so many questions here. Yeah, I mean, go to Target early, by the way. They are, you can do your own research, right? That little line. We can, it is, you can do your own research. And yeah, I mean, Craig asked this question about the Haley. I mentioned it in my remarks. anyone who's followed my work here knows that I have been an enormous proponent of us understanding this big opportunity we had with Never Trumpers. It's core to the Get 55 memo that I wrote, which is on the second day of Hopium, third day of Hopium. And I actually worked with the campaign, the Biden campaign, the then Biden campaign, to set up the Republicans for Biden operation and help, write memos and do the strategy and the arguments about why there's such a big opportunity here. And I think you've seen the campaign really execute aggressively against this. I mean, Liz Cheney has been incredible, and Adam Kinzinger. And, I'm sure that in the close, there are going to be, one of the things you can do for fun is, what would be the last two ads that you would run? What would be our ad and what would be the ad about them? And, the question whether that our ad is going to be somebody like Liz Cheney saying, I want to talk to my fellow Republicans, right? That you can't vote for this guy. I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to be really interesting to see, excuse me, how the campaign closes in the final month. Yeah, I know. People ask about, why is this race so close? And let me try to answer that, which is that we are in the process, I think, of successfully defeating a dangerous political movement in the United States. I think that question is an academic question. I think it's one of those things we can talk about after the election. Now, what we have to do is we just have to go win. And I think that this is my general advice to everybody about sort of how you approach the end game here, which is that you've got to narrow your information diet. You've got to do more, worry less, right? You've got to prevent yourself from getting blown around by the stuff that's going to blow you around, right? A tornado of disinformation and bullshit is going to be wandering all through our information environments. We already seen this with what happened with FEMA and over the last few days. And you need to hold steady. I mean, that's part of the reason I write every day is I try to give you guys something in the mornings. And I'm sorry, sometimes it's not in the morning. Today was a little late. Was I try to give you something that grounds you in truth and in what I see, in order to help it be less likely that you get blown around during the day. And one of the things that everyone, I just implore, I ask, I beg, is to not do what actually started happening a little bit on the Hopium chat in the last couple of days, which is to take something that's negative and sending it to your networks and saying, hey, have you seen this? Right? Without reading it, without understanding it, without contextualizing it, without processing it, and putting it into your understanding. Because when you do that, when you say, did you see this ugly poll, Simon? You're doing MAGA's work for them. You are now contributing to the negative sentiment machine. You're now part of MAGA when you do stuff like that. And people have to be wildly disciplined about how they, to take as I call it, to take responsibility of the sentiment you put out into the world. And I'm just going to say this in the Hopium chat, we had a couple people in the last couple of days dump negative stuff and then run. And I just want to be clear to all of you, man, I'm just going to remove people from the site immediately if they do this, because it's a troll thing. And I don't think these people actually are legitimately and authentic members of our community. And I'm just not going to put up with it. I'm going to have a very short leash, because I can just ban people for a month and then they can come back and hang out with us after the election. Right. And so because I feel like there is now in our community people who are starting to dump stuff and to frankly fuck with us a little bit, right? And I'm not going to let that happen. And it's why I'm so vigilant. I read every comment. I don't respond to every comment, but every comment on the site I read, and I respond. And I will tell you that one of my greatest disappointments is that I haven't been able to be in more open dialogue with all of you on the chat. I just run out of time, and I wish I could have more authentic engagement with all of you, than we do. And I don't like being in webinar, and I want to go back to the meeting mode. But let me do this, is that let me make one other hold on one second. My daughter's coming home from college tonight, so she's a freshman, so it's her first. Um, Look, I'll just say one last thing and then I'm going to do a close, that we're competing in all 7 states and they're all close. And we're going to be competing in all of them to election day. And we just have to win all of them, right? It's bottom line. If we lose Pennsylvania and we win North Carolina and Nevada and Arizona, we win, right? I mean, it's the whole theory of the Hopium strategy, of the checkmate strategy, was that we were likely to win Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And people have to also stop, I think, sort of saying in their heads, like, if we lose, right? The last poll in Pennsylvania has us up 4. Probably 80% of the polls in Pennsylvania taken in the last few weeks have us winning, right? So, like, we're doing good, everybody. Like, things are good. And we're just going to go fight it out in the 7 states. And hopefully we're going to win all of them. And if we lose a couple, that's fine, because we have other routes. You all got to see from Jane Klebb in the last few weeks about how we are going to win the blue dot in Nebraska. It's very exciting. Cynthia asks, is Tug named after Tug McGraw? And this will be, and then I'm going to do my close. So I grew up as a Mets fan, and I was a left-handed pitcher in high school, and I'm a baseball guy. And Tug McGraw was one of my heroes. And it's very possible that Tug came from Tug McGraw. And I don't know that because I named our dog. And I don't know that I really totally remember how it all happened, right? It was 12 years ago. But I'll try to bring him next week, and so you can meet him. He's 70 pounds of fun, of a bulldog. He's a big English bulldog, and he's an awesome dude. And he sits with me, just so you know. I write in a different part of the house every morning, and every morning I sit and he sits with me, and I actually sit on the floor for some of my writing, and he'll sit right next to me and we hang out together. So he's an important part of Hopium, actually. And but he's just been sick and ornery, and I just haven't wanted to introduce him into the community because he's just, he's old. Being 12-year-old bulldog is, it's Yoda kind of stuff. Here, I got Yoda. Yoda's a part of Hopium as well. Okay, let me do the close. Some of you have heard me do this, but for some of you, it will be new. Why am I doing this? Right, I'm in my son's bedroom here. I'm hanging out with all of you. I'm doing this because of something that Joe Biden talked about in his State of the Union address in January, where he mentioned the speech or it was actually March, that he mentioned the speech that FDR gave in 1941, the State of the Union address that FDR gave in 1941. And that speech, Biden referenced it and talked about it. And the way that he spoke about it in this State of the Union was that he talked about it as a speech that basically started rallying America to go fight the fascists and to go win World War II. It was at the beginning of 1941. And that speech is also known as the Four Freedoms speech. And in that speech, FDR was, I'm sorry, I just got emailed by MSNBC. They want me to be on tonight, so maybe I'll do it, right? I don't know, who knows? The hurricane is coming. The hurricane's here, right? And love to all the people of Florida. But going back to this, the Four Freedoms speech: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom from want, freedom from fear. Those 4 simple freedoms that FDR laid out in that speech, which he wrote himself. He had speech writers, but that part of the speech he wrote and articulated himself, have become the foundation of the modern world that we live in. Those 4 freedoms were embedded into the Atlantic Charter, which created the alliance between the UK and the United States that ended up winning World War II. They became the foundation of the United Nations Charter, which created, the understanding in international law that countries were sovereign and that countries should also release their colonial holdings, right? And to create sovereignty as this principle, which is being challenged right now in Ukraine, right? Where one country could not invade another. One country could not have dominion over another. Those 4 freedoms then became the foundation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was announced in 1948, which for the first time in international law was an attempt to create rights of human beings and not nations. It was in part negotiated by Eleanor Roosevelt. It was part of her legacy. And that Universal Declaration of Human Rights was the first time we had really pitted this concept of freedom versus dominion, where one person shouldn't have dominion over another in the world, and that human beings had rights, fundamental, inalienable rights, right? Very kind of American in the way that we think about this. And so those four freedoms became the basis of the modern world that happened after World War II and the international institutions that were created. And the era of the four freedoms, which is now, almost, it's over 80 years old, or it's about 80 years old, has created a golden age in human history. There's never been a better time to be alive in all of human history than during the period of the four freedoms, the Pax Americana, and NATO. And if you look at data, which we like to do here, the life expectancy of people around the world has gone from 45 years into the 70s now. The number of people who are literate and can read has tripled over this time, meaning that they now have the capacity to live far more fulfilled lives and pursue their dreams. We know that more people have lived under democracies in recent years than any time in human history. And we also know, what is my fourth? I didn't practice this tonight before I came in. And we know that more people, extreme poverty has plummeted while the population has grown. There's never been a better time to be alive in all of human history. There's never been a time when so many people could pursue their dreams without challenge or without dominion than any time in human history. And what's important for us is we have to go get the fuel and the energy we need to go win this election, is that golden age in human history was created by us, by the Democratic Party of the United States. We created that world. We created a world where more people had more opportunity than any time in human history, where more people have lived in freedom and not dominion than any time in human history. And we have to recognize what an extraordinary contribution this is. And that world of the four freedoms, that world of freedom and not dominion, is what Russia and Iran and China and MAGA are attempting to end. They want to return to a time of dominion and not freedom. And my friends, our party was called once before in the 1940s, and our party and our nation rose to the challenge of fascism and this attempt to end freedom around the world. And we're being called again. And the battle that you're in and the work that you're going to do is about preserving this world that we invented and created and have maintained and enabled, where more people have more capacity to do than any time in human history. There's never been a better time to be alive in all of human history than right now. And so the work we're doing is not just for our kids and our grandkids, but it's for the kids and the grandkids of every parent throughout the entire world. Because if we lose this election, right, that world of dominion is going to get a big shot in the arm. And we need the world of freedom to get the big shot in the arm in this election. And one of the reasons I'm so confident that we're going to win, or so optimistic, perhaps is a better and more accurate way of describing it. The reason I'm so optimistic that we can and will win is because all of you have already answered the call. We were called once before, but by being here, by donating, by doing the work, you are doing the work of democracy. You are protecting freedom in the work that you do. And the reason that I am so optimistic is that millions and millions of Americans have answered this call. We have more volunteers and more money than we've ever had right now. And that's because all of you in this time of choosing, this time when people had to stand up and be counted, you fought for our future, for our freedoms and our democracy. And I'm here ending tonight by saying thank you for this. But our most important work is ahead of us in the next 4 weeks. Let's go win this thing, because remember, everybody, when we fight, we win. Have a good night, all. Take care. And thanks for all that you do and for being part of this wonderful community. Take care.